In the early hours before sunrise, Russian forces launched what they thought would be a decisive strike near Pokrovsk. But within minutes, everything collapsed. Entire assault groups were wiped out, armored columns were shredded, and commanders were begging for extraction. What happened next didn't just derail a mission, it exposed a critical weakness inside Russia's war machine. Before dawn, everything changed. Near the frontline city of Pokrovsk, as reports of massive Russian losses sent shockwaves through military analysts, intelligence circles, and global newsrooms. What had been expected to be another routine Russian push, a familiar pattern of armored thrusts, infantry advances, and artillery cover, suddenly collapsed in dramatic fashion. Ukrainian officials were quick to say this wasn't just another failed attack. They described it as one of the most significant setbacks Russia has suffered in weeks, possibly months. But how did it unfold? The earliest signs came from intercepted Russian communications, and they revealed something unusual: panic. Not frustration, not confusion, pure, unfiltered panic. Russian field commanders were sending fragmented, rushed reports to their superiors, trying to explain why entire assault groups were suddenly off the grid. Some reported unexpected casualties. Others mentioned loss of visual contact with nearby units. Several more said the same chilling words: "We are falling back." For a military that prides itself on discipline and structure, these transmissions were shocking. They painted a picture of a force struggling to survive, not one confidently pushing forward. And it wasn't just radio chatter. Satellite feeds showed armored vehicles stopped in exposed fields. Drone surveillance revealed scattered infantry taking cover in trenches that weren't theirs, trenches Ukraine had built months before. Nothing about the situation resembled a coordinated offensive. It looked like something had hit them hard, fast, and from angles they didn't expect. On her primetime show, Rachel Maddow pulled these threads together and presented a much bigger story. This wasn't simply Russia taking a hit in one small sector. This was the collapse of an operation Moscow had hoped would turn the tide around Pokrovsk. For weeks, Russian forces had been quietly building pressure on this axis, bringing in fresh units, new artillery, and armored reserves. They believed Pokrovsk was the kind of symbolic and strategic win they desperately needed. But instead of a breakthrough, they walked into what Maddow called a premeditated defensive trap. She explained that Ukraine had been studying Russian movement patterns, identifying weak points, and waiting for the exact moment Russia would make a push. And when that moment came, Ukraine responded with precision, using drones, artillery, anti-tank systems, and well-prepared defensive positions to dismantle the Russian advance almost instantly. Maddow emphasized that this wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was the result of Ukraine anticipating Russia's next step before Russia even took it. And this anticipation didn't just blunt the attack, it reversed it. For military analysts watching the footage and reading the casualty reports, the scale of the failure became clear. Russia wasn't just repelled. It lost ground, manpower, and momentum all at once. What was meant to be a demonstration of strength turned into a public display of vulnerability. And so the bigger question, the question Maddow asked, the question everyone from Washington to Warsaw to Moscow wanted answered, became unavoidable. What exactly went so catastrophically wrong for Russia near Pokrovsk? Because whatever happened there didn't just disrupt a single operation. It exposed deeper flaws, ones the Kremlin might no longer be able to hide. According to battlefield sources, Russia had been preparing a major offensive push toward Pokrovsk for days, perhaps even weeks. Analysts who reviewed satellite images noted a familiar but unmistakable pattern: armored columns repositioning under cover of night, troop concentrations forming near staging grounds, and fresh artillery deployments lined up in grid-like formations. To Moscow, Pokrovsk wasn't just another Ukrainian city. It was a potential gateway, one that, if taken, could encircle Ukrainian defensive lines and force Kyiv to stretch its reinforcements dangerously thin. Russian planners believed the timing was perfect. Their troops had been rotating in fresh units, their supply lines were temporarily stable, and their intelligence officers claimed Ukraine was not expecting a large offensive in this sector. From the Kremlin's perspective, this was an opportunity to deliver a symbolic and strategic victory, but they were wrong. Very wrong. As the Russian assault groups moved forward, they immediately triggered what military strategists later described as a perfect layered defense, designed not just to stop the attack, but to shatter it completely. The first sign came from above. Ukrainian drones, silent, agile, and equipped with thermal optics, picked up the advancing Russian units long before Russian commanders realized they had been spotted. Ukraine's surveillance network had improved to the point where even nighttime movements were no longer hidden. As soon as the drones confirmed the advance, Ukrainian artillery units sprang into action. These weren't random, scattered shots. They created a deadly crossfire trap, with shells landing precisely where Russian vehicles were funneling through tight pathways. Ukrainian commanders had studied Russian movement patterns long enough to anticipate the exact routes they would take. Meanwhile, deep underground, Ukrainian anti-tank teams waited in fortified firing positions built months earlier in preparation for the day Russia would attempt an assault just like this. These teams held their fire until Russian armored vehicles entered narrow choke points where they had no room to maneuver. Then came the turning point. One of the first Russian vehicles hit a Ukrainian mine, halting the entire column. Another detonated seconds later. In an instant, Russian troops were stuck between damaged vehicles and incoming artillery. Panic began to spread. That was when Ukraine launched precision strikes from multiple angles, drones dropping explosives, javelin teams firing from concealed ridges, and long-range artillery pounding the rear of the formation to prevent retreat. Within minutes, the Russian assault group was no longer an assault group. It was a broken formation in complete disarray. Vehicles burned along the roadside. Infantry units scrambled for cover behind wreckage. Commanders attempted to regain control, but communication networks were jammed, damaged, or overwhelmed. Some units lost contact entirely with their leadership, forcing soldiers to make split-second decisions that often led to more confusion. Reports later described Russian troops abandoning equipment, splitting into small groups, and retreating in directions that contradicted their original orders. The attack, meant to demonstrate Russian strength, turned into a chaotic collapse. Ukrainian officers summed it up with chilling clarity. They walked into a trap they didn't know existed. Rachel Maddow, breaking down the situation on her show, highlighted how this wasn't just a tactical loss, it was a strategic embarrassment. She emphasized that Russia's continued reliance on massed assaults, outdated tactics, and rigid command structures is becoming increasingly unsustainable. These kinds of mistakes, Maddow noted, are exactly what Russia cannot afford, especially this late in the war. The Pokrovsk offensive wasn't just stopped, it was dismantled piece by piece. And in doing so, it exposed deep flaws within the Russian military system, flaws that Ukraine is learning to exploit with deadly accuracy. By mid-morning, reports from the battlefield painted a picture of intense confusion and near total breakdown among Russian units. What began as an organized offensive had spiraled into chaos within hours. Survivors from the first wave were desperately trying to pull back, stumbling over bodies, damaged vehicles, and cratered terrain. At the same time, freshly deployed reinforcements were moving forward, unaware of the scale of the disaster unfolding in front of them. This collision of retreating and advancing forces created a nightmare scenario. Traffic jams, blocked escape routes, and even friendly fire incidents as nervous and disoriented Russian soldiers opened fire at anything that moved. Several intercepted communications captured commanders screaming at their units to hold position, while others shouted conflicting orders to withdraw, adding to the chaos. According to analysts who later reviewed the aftermath, dozens of armored vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored carriers were disabled or completely destroyed within a short window of time. Multiple Russian battalions suffered catastrophic manpower losses, with some units losing more than half their strength in a single morning. Several soldiers reportedly refused to return to the front line, describing the battlefield as suicide and claiming they were sent forward with no intelligence, no coordination, and no support. At least one senior commander was removed from his position within hours, accused of incompetence and sending troops into an unprepared kill zone. Rachel Maddow pointed out that what happened at Pokrovsk was not just a failure, it was an unraveling. The sheer scale of the losses sparked immediate outrage inside Russia's military communication channels. Soldiers vented openly, blaming their leadership for poor planning and accusing commanders of withholding vital reconnaissance data. Others complained that they were given orders to advance without artillery cover or air support, essential components of any offensive operation. Videos began to surface online, posted by angry Russian troops, showing exhausted men shouting at their superiors, calling the assault a death sentence and a suicidal push. Some clips featured soldiers pleading for proper equipment, while others simply demanded answers. Why were we sent in blind? Why did nobody warn us? As Maddow emphasized, this level of public anger was unusual. Russia tightly controls its information space, especially when it comes to military morale. For soldiers to record, post, and circulate such videos meant the situation was far more severe than Moscow wanted to admit. And Maddow made a critical point. This meltdown wasn't just about Pokrovsk. It was part of a much deeper, systemic problem inside the Russian military. Political pressure from the Kremlin, pressure to show progress, to deliver victories, to maintain the narrative of strength, was forcing commanders to launch offensives they were not ready for. Commanders who hesitated risked losing their positions. Commanders who pushed ahead risked losing their men. Many chose the latter. Pokrovsk exposed this pressure in the most brutal way. It showed a military structure caught between political expectations and battlefield realities, one that repeatedly sends troops into impossible situations, hoping brute force will overcome strategic failures. In the end, Pokrovsk didn't just reveal a tactical setback. It revealed a system-wide weakness, a leadership crisis that no amount of propaganda can hide, and one that could continue to haunt Russia in every future offensive. While Russia suffered heavy losses, Ukraine moved with remarkable speed and precision, capitalizing on every second of the chaos rippling through the Russian ranks. By the afternoon, Ukrainian forces had turned the failed Russian offensive into a strategic windfall, using the disarray not just to defend but to advance. First, Ukrainian troops recaptured several forward positions Russia had taken in previous days. These positions weren't just symbolic, they offered elevated views, firing angles, and access points that Ukraine had been trying to restore for weeks. Once Russian forces abandoned them in panic, Ukrainian units moved in almost immediately, securing them before Moscow could regroup. Next came the destruction of key Russian supply routes. Long-range Ukrainian artillery targeted ammunition trucks, fuel convoys, and mobile command posts retreating from the chaos. These strikes were precise and devastating. Analysts later noted that by cutting off these supply arteries, Ukraine didn't just stop the current offensive, it disrupted Russia's ability to launch another for the foreseeable future. Equally important was the equipment left behind. Russian troops fleeing in confusion, abandoned armored vehicles, munitions, communication rigs, and even encrypted tablets. Ukrainian technicians quickly collected these items, gaining access to systems that could reveal future Russian troop movements, radio frequencies, and planned logistics routes. But the biggest prize came from intercepted Russian command data retrieved from abandoned communication devices. Military intelligence experts suggested this could offer Ukraine a clearer picture of Russian command chains, planned assaults, and weak points in their operational structure. Information like this doesn't just help for one battle, it shapes strategy for weeks or months. This wasn't luck. This was strategy executed with discipline and timing. Ukraine used the aftermath near Pokrovsk to reinforce defensive lines, reposition artillery, and fortify trenches that had been under pressure for days. What Russia intended as a breakthrough became the exact opposite: a strengthening of Ukraine's defenses and a weakening of Russia's presence. Military analysts now suggest that Russia may need weeks, possibly even months, to rebuild enough manpower, equipment, and morale to attempt another large-scale attack in the region. Some experts argue that given the scale of the losses, Russia might abandon the Pokrovsk axis entirely for the time being. On her primetime broadcast, Rachel Maddow highlighted what she called a turning point in battlefield psychology. Ukraine wasn't just blocking Russian advances anymore, it was anticipating them, shaping them, and using them to its advantage. The ability to predict Russian movements, prepare layered defenses, and strike with perfect timing marked a deeper shift in Ukraine's strategic posture. One Ukrainian officer captured the day's significance with a phrase that instantly went viral across social media. Pokrovsk didn't fall, Russia did. That statement resonated far beyond military circles. It energized Ukrainian morale at a time when the country needed it most. It signaled to Ukraine's allies that their support was producing real results. And it sent a message to Russia that their costly offensives were not breaking Ukrainian defenses. Instead, they were unintentionally reinforcing them. For Ukraine, Pokrovsk wasn't just another battlefield victory. It was a psychological triumph, a strategic success, and a reminder that even under pressure, the right strategy can turn the tide in an instant. The massive losses near Pokrovsk are more than a headline or a single day's story. They carry the potential to reshape the trajectory of the war itself. What unfolded on that battlefield wasn't just a tactical misstep or a momentary lapse in planning. It was a collapse significant enough to alter Russian strategy, boost Ukrainian morale, and force analysts around the world to rethink their predictions about the conflict's next phase. The first major takeaway is stark. Russia's offensive capability in the Pokrovsk region has been severely weakened. The number of vehicles lost, the casualties suffered, and the breakdown in command structure mean that Russia can no longer maintain the same pace or intensity of operations in this area. Rebuilding these forces will take time Ukraine now controls. Secondly, Ukraine gained not just momentum, but strategically important ground. By recapturing forward positions, destroying supply routes, and seizing abandoned equipment, Ukrainian forces didn't merely survive the attack, they turned the collapse into a tactical advantage. Experts say these gains make future Russian assaults more difficult, giving Ukraine a stronger defensive network and better visibility over the region. Third, the setback has exposed deep fractures within Russia's own military ranks. Internal tensions are rising, with soldiers publicly criticizing their commanders in videos that the Kremlin cannot fully suppress. Such open dissent is rare in Russia's tightly controlled information environment. The fact that soldiers are risking punishment to complain publicly signals a broader crisis in confidence among Russian troops. Western intelligence agencies and military analysts are now openly questioning whether Russia can sustain its long-term objectives. They point out that Moscow is burning through equipment and manpower at a pace that outstrips its ability to replenish them. If setbacks like Pokrovsk continue, Russia may be forced into defensive postures in regions it once hoped to dominate. Perhaps the most strategically impactful outcome is that the Pokrovsk defeat may force Moscow to redeploy troops from other fronts to compensate for the losses. That shift could weaken Russian lines in areas like the Donetsk outskirts, the southern battlefield corridors, or the northeastern axes, where Russia has tried but often failed to make gains. Every soldier or vehicle pulled to reinforce Pokrovsk is one removed from another critical point in the conflict. On her show, Rachel Maddow delivered a message that summed up the moment with extraordinary clarity. She reminded viewers that wars are not determined by sheer numbers or by equipment alone. They are won by strategy, morale, timing, and adaptability. 4 areas where Ukraine demonstrated overwhelming superiority near Pokrovsk. Her conclusion struck a chord across audiences worldwide. As global observers watch the aftermath of Russia's stunning defeat, one truth is becoming difficult to ignore. Pokrovsk marks a turning point. A turning point Russia neither anticipated nor prepared for. A turning point Ukraine fully intends to build on. What happened near Pokrovsk was not just a failed offensive. It was a changing of momentum, one that could influence the direction of the war long after the smoke clears. Thanks for watching. If you learned something new today, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more in-depth coverage. And remember, your engagement helps this channel reach even more viewers.